Welcome to another episode of Shenmue the Animation, differences between it and the games. I'm Magnus, and if you like these type of videos, definitely consider subscribing. Now let's get on right away, but first, this episode's kind of out a little late. It's out after episode 11, and I'm already working on that. I saw episode 11, and I was like, oh my gosh, the show is so good. And there's so many details that I have to pick apart there, so that'll be my next video. And it took me a while to pick apart episode 10 because there was just a lot of things to just kind of bring out for you guys. So, without further ado, let's get on it. And as always, spoiler warning for all the episodes and of course the entire Shenmue 2 and Shenmue 3 video games. Without further ado, let's go on to the differences. So starting off with this first scene, we see Shenmue talking to her father, and basically her father's saying, I've got to go to the stone quarry, and she's like, can I make you food? And he's pretty much like, I'm gonna be gone for a couple of days. So she's pretty much like, I'll bring you food when it's ready, and then he just leaves and she sees him walking away. And then, of course, she's looking at the Shenmue tree and is like, oh, it's starting to bloom. Now, none of this is in the games, but it gives context to Shenmue's character. And then, of course, it seems that her father knows a little bit more than he's letting on about possibly the prophecy or what's going to happen. So he's really adamant about doing what he needs to do. Moving on. Now, the next scene, you see Ryo actually walking away from Manmo Temple, and he bumps into Wong, and then Wong tells him Ren's waiting. And then when he goes to Ren, in, of course, the hideout, Ren's kind of like intrigued by all of this that's going on. And he mentions to Ryo that, hey, I know this guy named Yang who might know where Yandezu is, so let's go talk to him. And then they just head off to Kowloon. In the games, what's slightly different about this is that when Ryo was leaving Wanzai, and basically that area, to go to Kowloon, he said goodbye to everyone first, and then before leaving the Manmo Temple, you see Zhu teaches him the counter elbow assault. And this didn't happen in the anime at this point. Now we know that it'll eventually happen, but it didn't happen at this point in the animation. But it did happen in the games before he left. And leaving this area was like a big, grandiose event because you had to say goodbye to everybody. You were leaving this area. And then you were traveling to Kowloon, which seemed like it probably was very, very far away. And you see Ryo on a bus actually going to the walled city of Kowloon. But if you know anything about the distance between Hong Kong and Kowloon, Kowloon is technically in Hong Kong. And it's only basically around 4 kilometers away from the main area of Hong Kong. So it's not that far. So the actual animation made it seem like, okay, it's a lot closer. It's just in a different area. And then let's go there. So in this next scene, we see Ryo and Ren meet with Yang at his shop in Kowloon. In this scene in the animation, Ryo shows him the letter from Yandezu, but then Yang tells them, go to this man dressed in black at a location that he gives them. And they just go on from there. Now in the video games, the difference is that Ryo doesn't show him a letter, but he actually shows him the Chaowan sign little card. And then that's what convinces Yang to help them out because the card had Yandezu's symbol on it. So then he tells them not only to go to a man in black, but tells them specific instructions about where to go. And they proceed from there. Now in this next scene, we see Ryo and Ren go to the man dressed in black, and he tells them to go to the door. Now Ren is initially untrusting because he's seeing these characters are looking suspicious. So he tells Ryo, go in that door by yourself. I'm going to wait out here. Then when Ryo goes to the door, he's presented with Dan Yu. And Dan Yu is like, huh, gotcha. Now, these events are very similar to the game, but the game actually draws it out a little bit more with various men in black before you go through the door. Ren eventually comes in to save the day, or try to save the day, just like in the game. So both the animation and the game actually are pretty similar, with a few dialogue changes, but for the most part, it's similar. And then, of course, at the end, Dan Yu finishes off both Ryo and Ren and locks them up. Now in this next scene, we see that Ryo and Ren are locked up, just like in the video games. However, the animation added something that wasn't in the games, and it was context on how Dan Yu came to power. See, Dan Yu and his Yellowhead gang were actually part of like a security guard for a large group that owned casinos called the White Tie. And the White Tie were pretty much in control of Hong Kong. But then Dan Yu and the rest of the Yellowhead betrayed the leader of the White Tie and actually blew up his car. And that actually led to the Yellowhead gang, led by Dan Yu, to take control of Hong Kong for the most part, or at least take control of the underworld settings of Hong Kong. He still wasn't in fully control, because in control is, of course, the Chiu Men. But it gave them more power, and that's kind of what led to Dan Yu's uprising. Now, in the games, none of that backstory is ever explained, so it's all new to fans. And then the events of Ryo and Ren breaking out are very similar in both the games and the animation. Now, in this next scene, you see Ryo and Ren talking on the rooftop. Now, Ryo's basically explaining who he's really after, and he explains to Ren that he's actually after Lan Di of the Chiu Men. Now, this kind of intrigues Ren, and then he can't believe, like, you're after the Chiu Men? Holy cow. And then we skip to a scene where it actually goes to Lan Di talking to Dan Yu and Yuan. And Dan Yu and Yuan, they're bent at the knee over Lan Di. So right here we can tell that Lan Di is a very powerful leader. And Dan Yu is basically saying, look, we've captured these two. One of them is Japanese, one isn't, and we think that we're actually going to get our hands on Yanduzu, and it's just there. And then basically they're like, if we get Yanduzu, can we actually get control of Hong Kong? And Lan Di's kind of like, fine. He doesn't really care, but Lan Di is intrigued at the fact that he mentioned a Japanese kid, and he's like, wait a minute, Japanese? Almost like he knows this Japanese kid, and he kind of knows what's going on. Again, Lan Di doesn't care about what they do, and then in comes the guy from the Yellowhead gang, basically telling them that, look, these two guys escaped, and that's where the scene ends here. Now, moving on to the escape scenes, of course, we see Ryo and Ren trying to get out. They go into an elevator, and then they bump into Yuan. They have a little scuffle with Yuan, and then basically knock him down. And then that's when Dan Yu comes out of the elevator. He's like, what happened here? And from there, he starts chasing Ryo and Ren up to what looks like an exit, but that exit actually isn't really an exit, and they have to jump over to the next building one level down. This is pretty similar to the game, slight but unimportant differences. But the one thing that is different from when I play it, I'm not sure if it's even possible in the games, but in the games, it's like daytime when they actually escape. But in the animation, it's nighttime when they jump from building to building. So just thought I'd mention that. Moving on. Now, this next scene is kind of different in the games when compared to the animation. Now, in the animation, Wong is taking the cuffs off where Wong's base is, in Wanzai. And you have Joy there, and you have Wong there, and then, of course, Ryo and Ren. And then basically they leave to go settle the score with Yang. Now, the difference is, rather than taking place in Wanzai, it takes place in Ren's hideout in Kowloon. And he just sits there and orders Cool Z to get Wong for me, because Wong is pretty good at loosening handcuffs. So when Wong shows up, he makes Ren promise to him that he'll take Ryo back to Wanzai because he misses Ryo. So Ren agrees, but then of course after they're off, he's like, no, we got business to take care of. And then they go handle their business with Yang. Now, in the animation too, you had Joy in the room the entire time. But in the actual video game, Joy was never inside of the hideout with them. You don't see Joy until after they leave the hideout and they're about to go. And Ren realizes, wait, you guys know each other? And he's like, I don't care. We need to go handle our business with Yang. Moving on. So now this next scene is very similar in both the animation and the games. They beat up Yang and press him for information. And that's where Yang reveals, you know what? Go see Wong. He'll be able to help you. And then Ren immediately knows, oh, Wong, that's the wiretapper guy. And Ryo's like, you know him? He's like, yeah. Now, in the games, Ren is pretty much like, okay, here's where you go, but you go, I've got some business to handle. And Ryo's like, okay, I guess I'll go on my own. Whereas in the animation, Ren goes with Ryo to the wiretapping place. Now, this tends to happen a couple of times, where in the animation, Ren and Ryo are together, whereas in the games, Ren tends to be busy and Ryo's got to do it himself. Now, in this next scene, you see Ryo and Ren looking for the tapes, and of course, in the actual video game, Ryo's looking for the tapes alone. But the animation, pretty much they find the tapes right away. And then they go to the hideout, and Ren gives him a tape player and says, go through all the tapes. Now, in both the animation and the video games, it's kind of similar at this point where Ren is like, here, you listen to the tapes, and Ryo knows what he has to do. Ren's still feeling, and you can see it in his face, he's still getting that big score vibes, like, this is going to lead to something. Now, in this next scene, we go back to Manmo Temple, where we see Shu Ying, and she then starts having more memories of her brother wanting to leave and then go and join the Chiu Men so that he can avenge their father's death. Though this scene is kind of original, the flashback is actually in the games as well. But the way it plays out in the animation is like it's at a unique point. Because in the games, when Ryo's going over the tapes, it just skips to the next morning where Ryo's still listening to all the tapes. And it doesn't have this breaking point. So that's that. Moving on. So now in this next scene, they find the tape where they actually hear Yuan's voice talking about how they captured Yanduzu's assistant. Now this is alarming, and of course they want to find out where Yuan is. Now in the animation, immediately you see Ren say, you know what? I heard a squawking bird. We've got to go to a bird shop and then ask around, because then we might be able to actually find out where Yuan hangs out. Now this is different from the video games, because in the video games, you don't immediately realize that that's a talking bird until you go to a daycare and speak to a little kid where they mention, oh, you know what? He always has something, an animal that talks a lot. And then of course, speaking to the teacher, you realize maybe you should go to a bird shop because it was a talking bird. So it's kind of more drawn out in the video games. Whereas the animation was like, Ren figured it out, let's go to that bird shop right away. So I think it makes a lot more sense to shorten this up rather than pull it out and make it longer. But the game, of course, wanted to stretch out the storyline as much as it could. Moving on. So now in this next set of scenes, it's kind of similar to the game where they show up at the bird shop, and then of course, yeah, Yuan likes to pass by, so they hide out waiting for Yuan. While they're waiting around, Ryo was like, why are you helping me so much? And Ren was like, well, because I see that there's a big score here. Ren is making excuses as to why he's helping Ryo out, but it almost seems like we're trying to build to what Ren's intentions actually are. And I think that that's very similar to the games, though the games haven't really revealed that as much yet. The series has really tried to pull that out from Ren's personality. Now, eventually, Yuan does show up, and then, just like the games, they're like, we're going to follow. However, the difference is the games have you follow Yuan on a bunch of weird places and different things and different interests and how Yuan actually is. So you're able to see a little bit more of Yuan's distinctive personality in the video games. Whereas here, Yuan just got the bird feed, heading straight back directly. But they did pull out the fact that Yuan saw trash and Yuan was completely disgusted by it. Now that's a normal person's reaction, but Yuan's reactions was in particular emphasized, and Ren was like, geez, must be some sort of neat freak. And of course, hatred for trash will come into play later, I would assume. Moving on. Now in this next scene, this is of course Ryo and Ren breaking into Yuan's apartment. In the animation, they just knock on the door, Yuan opens it, and then Ryo punches him in the gut, knocking out Yuan. From there, they find Yanduzu's assistant, and then of course Danyu approaches. Now these first few scenes play out kind of different in the games. The game adds one little detail which is omitted from the animation. They're both arguing over who's going to attempt to get in first. And then Ren says, you know what, we'll flip for it. Heads or tails. And then of course, no matter what you pick as a character, Ryo will lose the coin toss. From there, Ryo knocks on the door, and then when Yuan opens it, Ryo smash kicks the door open. Yuan reels back and gets knocked out. Now that difference, I guess, was subtle, but it's like the animation removed that heads or tails game, which kind of a shame because I thought it was pretty funny from the games that they didn't put it in the animation. But then of course the rest of the events where Danyu is approaching the apartment, and of course they hide, and then eventually they bust out of there and trick Danyu into going into the closet. All of that was similar in both the games and the animation. Now this next scene where they actually have Yanduzu's assistant and they saved him, kind of different between the animation and the games. Now in the animation, you take him outside, and then of course he reveals that Yanduzu's in the Ghost Hall building. And then from there, he gives you a set of keys, and he's like, here, you'll need this. And then finally, Ren mentions, you know what, we'll have Sam take you back to the hideout. Now that's the first time that the other gang members are mentioned in a while in the animation. But the difference is that in the actual video games, you take him to Ren's hideout, and then Ren's hideout, you see Joy comforting him, and you already see Cool Z in the room as well. And then Yanduzu's assistant reveals Yanduzu is in the Ghost Hall building, but rather than giving you 4 keys, he gives you 1. Now in the animation, Ren and Ryo go together, but in the video game, Ren is once again saying, I'm kind of busy. You know what, Ryo, you go on ahead, I'll meet up with you later. These scenes play out a little bit differently, but for the context, still the same thing. Basically, let's go to Yanduzu. Now these scenes in particular are very different from the games. In the animation, we see Ren and Rio just go to the Ghost Hall building, use the keys in different weird places as they're going from trapdoor to trapdoor to trapdoor, before eventually getting to Yanduzu. In the games, you actually have to climb the Ghost Hall building by yourself, going through stairs, elevators, and then of course, walking across planks, which was all very dangerous. But then you eventually get into a room where you have to use that first key and other keys on a specific statue where you can put 4 keys into that one statue before the door opens. In the animation, even the last statue that's used is very different from the statue that represents the door to open Yanduzu in the video game. So that at least is different. But then when you finally meet Yanduzu, he's pretty much sitting there with a book, which is very strange, but he was just sitting there like, who are you guys? So only that part is similar. Everything else is different. But then, of course, we see Danyu and Yuan and everybody just come in, and Danyu actually knocks Rio out the window, where Ren just kind of jumped out to get the heck out of there. That part is very similar in both the games and the animation. And then finally, we have Danyu and the thugs jump down, and they're all ready to fight Rio, who was basically dazed, and they're gonna really kick his butt. And at that point, we see Shu Ying just come, and she just looks at Danyu like, oh, it's on. And Rio's like, well, what the heck's going on? The games is slightly different because when Rio's knocked down, he's still on his feet. We see Danyu there, but then gang members start to fight you first before Danyu jumps down, ready to take you out. And then the game kind of like fades to dark before we see that Shu Ying comes in, and we only see her legs before she comes in and kind of saves the day. And that's it, before the game moves on. And that's it. That's all the stuff that happened in episode 10. Now, episode 11, I've already seen, so I already know what happens, and it's very interesting. I've got to go over the details. Usually when I watch these episodes, I watch it for enjoyment. I don't take notes or anything, but my head can't help but make mental notes of everything that's going on and all the differences, because I'm already getting used to analyzing it that way. But it does take me a little bit to just kind of put all this stuff together, which is why this episode's kind of late. My apologies. But tune in next week for the next episode of differences between episode 11, games versus animation. Hopefully I'll get it out sooner than before episode 12 premieres, but we never know. Anyway, thank you for watching, and as always, thank you so much for the attention, the comments. Leave your comments down below what you thought of this episode, what you thought of episode 11 too, although be careful with spoilers in case people haven't seen episode 11 yet. And as always, you'd make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. Hit that like button too, that helps us out. See you guys later.